Put your hands together for Lev Lewis.
I also want to invite up onto the stage with me my producers and filmmaking partners, Yona Lewis and Calvin Thomas, and one of the stars of the film, Derek Campbell. Thanks so much for sticking around. Wow, we get to sit. This is super cool.
This is the last screening in the venue tonight, so we can just hang out. Lev, let's start from the beginning. Can you talk about the origin for the project?
Yeah, so the origin for the project was basically just watching Butterfield 8, which is an Elizabeth Taylor film from 1960. She won her first Best Actress for it. And it starts with the sequence in this film where she wakes up in the fancy house and she's walking through and just sort of like seeing this sort of rich man's house that is out of her grasp. And I think we had just been working on stuff before that was like really unsexy. And I started to think of like, well, this would be cool to make something that was like about like attractive people in attractive places. And then from there, it just sort of kept going. But I also like the idea of somebody waking up in something that they're so cemented in, but also can't remotely grasp, and just trying to hold on to this one moment of like, I'm in this thing and I may never be back in this again, but I'm just going to relive this moment as long as I possibly can. So it was partly from good ideas and partly from, aesthetics.
You've worked with Calvin and Yona, obviously, for a while now, but this is your first time directing, correct?
Yeah, basically.
Could you talk about working with actors from behind the camera for the first time, as well as casting in that process?
Right. Well, yeah, so starting with casting, we started with Melanie in the lead role. I had seen her in New York director Nathan Silver's film Soft in the Head, and I really liked her in that. And as I was writing this film, I started to just think of people that would fit for it, and suddenly she came to mind, and so I sort of wrote, subsequent drafts with her in mind for it. And then eventually I just got her contact, wrote her, and she was game, and so it went from there. And then beyond that, when we're making a low budget film, I'm thinking, what are the things nearby? Who are the great people around me that I can get to fill out these little roles? Someone like Dara is the first person that comes to mind. So part of it is you start to think of, okay, how can I write these roles for these people, playing on their strengths, but also playing against what they usually might do. And then also just filling out. This film was hard. I think we had to fill out a lot of small roles, people that would just come out for a day or two, a few hours of screen time. And so it was just like, a few hours of set time. So it was a lot of reaching around for people that I knew in life that I just thought their persona might translate onto screen, but had really never been in a film before.
Going off of that, I'll throw it to Dara. Could you just talk about your character and preparing for this role and what you were going for? Because you have such a peculiar sort of role in the film.
I don't think I was cast because I was like my character. But I think probably Lev was going more for the other thing he said, which was something that I usually do. So Lev did rehearsals, which was fun, and I guess we had to try and find a place that was between a kind of caricature and an exaggeration, and someone that, I really loved Melanie's performance, and I think Lev, I could tell that Lev kind of knew what he wanted tonally. And you provided like a lot of feedback, I guess, and it was like you could tell you're sort of like honing what you wanted out of the performance, I think. So I guess it was more responding to Lev. I didn't know exactly what the full vision was.
Yeah, we did manage to get rehearsals in, and it's an odd film. I'm not necessarily interested just in naturalism. A lot of the lines, a lot of the things are very unusual. Like they're not things that you would normally say or do. So it's a hard balance to strike, and I think being in rehearsals helped a little bit. And also, we didn't have much time to shoot, so when you're on set, you just kind of have to like hope that the things that you plan beforehand kick into gear. But so it's a kind of thrilling thing. But it's thrilling, but also extraordinarily difficult to gauge as you're doing it.
For both Calvin and Yona, could you talk about the three of you as sort of a creative unit for those who might not be familiar with your work, and talk about how you work?
Should we go one word each? Back and forth. No, I mean, we work really closely together. Yona and I have made a couple of features together. Lev's always been very close in creatively. So in our past features, Lev's always written the score for the film. In the Oxbow Cure, which you mentioned in your intro, we edited it together. Lev did the score. Lev wrote it with us. So we've been a bit of a unit creatively for a long time. And then, when it came time for Lev to sort of make his own piece, which I think made sense, we just acted as producers, and that was kind of a nice moment for us because we could sort of be there creatively as we've worked over the last couple of years together. But it was a bit of a reduction in terms of the roles that we're used to. In our past films, we've written and directed and produced, and so just producing this film kind of allowed us to just be very specific and try to do the best job at one role. So that was a bit of a change where I think the roles were a little bit more delineated in this film, but I think that was very valuable.
I don't have anything to add. I'll just look pretty.
Lev, could you talk about the musical score, your vision for it, maybe the process of composing the score, at what point in the production it came about?
Pretty late, I guess. We finished the cut of this in early March, and so I started writing the score right away. I wrote it in a few weeks, recorded it in about 5 days. So as it has always been in everything I've ever done a score for, it's really, really rushed. And I think probably my ideas are better than my execution. So with something like this, you're trying to go for something kind of quite lush, quite evocative, and it's hard to do when you have your musicians with you for 2 hours. But I was able to get really great musicians, and we were able to work in a nice studio. So you just, pray to the God that I don't believe in for that amount of time. Yeah.
Do you score to the image, or how did it work?
No, it's very rigidly timed. So I work it all out just in Logic beforehand, and then it was recorded in segments. So we'd have sections. So we had a string section, we had a string quartet, and then we had a woodwind section. We had a harpist. I did the piano and some percussion and stuff like that. And over maybe 2 or 3 days. So you would just bring in one section, record them. They would be playing to MIDI tracks. They would finish, then me and my engineer would just throw that on their tracks, the best takes we could find of theirs, onto the session, and then the woodwinds would play to the string section or something like that. So it was just a very constant process of just adding and adding and adding, and also subtracting the bad MIDI tracks that we had going along. So yeah.
Any questions in the audience? In the balcony? Yes? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, it started, as I mentioned, the Butterfield 8 thing was the inspiration for it, and that's a penthouse in an apartment building. So it did start as that. We didn't have a lot of money, so the biggest terror of starting this film was, can we get an apartment where the story could hinge around? And eventually we found a house, which was totally counter to what I envisioned this project as being, but one was the best thing we could find, and two, I think just lent it an aspect to it that just felt really different from how the inspirations had come from it, and I liked the uniqueness of that, I guess. I like this house. It's not that nice of a house. You know, we were on set there for 3 or 5 days or whatever it was, and I mean, everything would just break. Like you would go to the sink and stuff would just fall off. You know, it's not that nice of a place. But there's something appealing about it in this
That
weird
automated
way.
toilet, I think, is the most unhygienic thing imaginable.
Yeah,
having
Colin got
having
really
an
scared by that.
iPod next to the toilet is a terrible idea.
Yeah, it's so weird. So I liked how it wasn't nice, but it also like had this a weird appeal. It was like very kitschy in a way that I thought. Well, it added to my understanding of the character actually that I didn't have before. So we just lucked into it. It was an Airbnb. The guy was really eager to let us shoot there.
He really wanted a first Airbnb review, so he said he'd cut us a deal. He'd let us shoot there if we gave him a favorable Airbnb review. So
We did.
we did.
Raise your hands if you have a question. Okay, I'm going to ask it before anyone else does. The Intestine, the title. Lev.
I've prepared for this, I think. It's a quote. It's a quote from Henry Miller from Tropic of Cancer. I think, if I can remember, it's something like, "Life," said Thoreau, "consists of what you think about all day. If that's the case, then I must just be a big intestine, for all I think about is food, and all I dream about at night is food." I'm pretty sure the way that Henry Miller and Thoreau thought about that is not remotely presented on screen. But the way that I extrapolated from that was sort of something very like primal about just like the everyday need for food and sustenance and connection. And obviously the film is about a woman who has nothing really to grasp at. And so it's her trying to find something to fill herself with. And I don't think she succeeds, I guess, but maybe other people disagree.
More questions? Yes, in the back. The question is about the final scene in the film where she can't be recognized on the phone and the significance of that choice.
I read it most simply as like a bit of an identity crisis. I don't know. She's lost who she is in gaining the life she wants.
Very nice. Yeah. Yeah, it's a little confusing, I guess. She's reached something that she thought she wanted, and then in the process loses something that she didn't know she was going to lose.
Going further along those lines, like the connection between identity and place and class, could you talk about sort of that theme in the film, and maybe that will help answer that question
Make Yona
in another
answer.
way?
Sorry?
Yona answer.
Yona?
Yona, you can take this if you want.
What's the question exactly?
Identity
talk.
and place.
Just talk more about the movie.
Just talk.
Everyone else ran away for drinks, and I decided to stay and watch it with you guys. And there were certain things in it that I noticed more.
Is that a criticism?
No, I just drew the short straw. I think that there were things I hadn't noticed before, like all of the doubling, how there's sort of almost everybody is there twice in various ways, which I hadn't caught before. And I actually don't know what the question is.
No, okay. Well, I would just say, I mean, the way that I guess I generally would write something is that I start with sort of images or like a plot that I find intriguing, and then I build themes on top of that. So any ideas of class or identity or something like that, they're come at the last stage of things almost. Maybe less so these days, but certainly when I was writing that. So it's hard for me to answer it, I guess, because the things that I think of as intrinsic to the project aren't really those things, the things that I think of as like a woman waking up in bed and knowing where she is, but also not knowing where she is. And I guess I try and get at some of the class things. I mean, you're shooting on 2 different formats, and there's some very obvious ways that I'm trying to get at those things, but it's hard for me to talk too much about them because they're not at the front of my mind. Only at a portion of the process am I really thinking about that, and I just hope that they kind of shine through that. But it's not the forefront.
Well, going off of that and the sort of sequencing of your process, could you talk about how much the film changed from the initial writing of the script to directing on set?
Oh, right, yeah. I mean, I guess completely. Totally. Yeah. From directing on set, well, I mean, directing on set, it didn't change too much, I guess, from the final draft of the film. The final draft was very different from the initial idea, as I think probably most things would be.
I think one of the interesting things about watching it here again today is the difference in those cameras, and you briefly talked about that. And I don't know how much people notice that or not, but the difference between the 2 looks of the film and how dramatically different they are. And did people notice that there were sort of 2 different things? Yeah, I mean, is there something you're interested in talking about the choice between those 2 cameras? Lev?
He's not talking
No,
to me.
not Adam.
And maybe talk about the cinematographer as well.
Yeah, Nikolai he's a great cinematographer. He's got his own short film playing across town, so he's not here right now. But yeah, the initial idea for the film was to shoot it or my initial idea that was not ever really feasible, was to shoot it in 3 formats: video, 16mm, and HD, and have those at various different points throughout it. Shooting on film just became untenable. And so I just basically shrunk it down to just shooting on essentially video. It's mini DV and HD, and the HD coming in, being employed whenever Melanie or Maya, the character, was in possession of the house. So people that had watched it before have been a little confused by when that's being used or not, because there's moments when she's in the house and we're shooting on mini DV and it looks kind of, quote unquote bad. But it's really only meant to be used when she feels like she has control over it. And so when she's going in later, sort of midway through the film, and she's trying to get it back, we're still using the mini DV. It's a funny thing because, I'm not really shooting it any differently in either way. But like a lot of people just think like, well, why did you not light the scene properly? But it's just because we're on like a camera from 2003 or something, as opposed to an Arri mirror for the HD stuff, which is a relatively nice new camera. But I think part of the thing with the shooting, I have the digital filmmaking that I like doesn't try and approximate film, because I don't think it's possible to take an Alexa or a Red or something and just make something that looks like 35mm or 16mm. It looks very different and usually quite worse. So the thing that in pre-production I was trying to do was figure out what's like the style that I can use for this film, because I know I can't shoot film that I will actually be pleased with, that will look like digital. It won't just look like me approximating, Butterfield 8. I mean, I'm not shooting in Technicolor 1960. It's not possible to do with this sort of money. So it was a long process of trying to figure out what we're going to shoot on. And then finally I was happy, I think, with that duality, I guess, as you want to mention.
Questions? I have a fun producer question. Can you talk about crowdfunding, which is partly or completely how you finance this film, and film in the past as well, I think?
Yeah, you prepped me about crowdfunding. I knew you were going to ask.
I was trying to make it natural.
We funded the Oxbow Cure, which is our previous feature, partially through Kickstarter.
And our first Amy George as well through. And then this one as well, but always very small amounts. So I think I don't know if this still exists, but I think a lot of people, and I certainly think with our first Kickstarter thing,
we thought that maybe everyone on the internet will like find out of this cool project and submit, and you'll go over your stretch goals and all sorts of things. But the way that we found crowdfunding to work is just it's a great way of getting your friends and your family to sort of be aware of the project and support it in whatever way that they can. It's a lot of work, and it's sort of like doing like pre-production on a film to do it quite successfully. There's certainly lots of people that are amazing at marketing their film early and have these kind of lavish campaigns that make $100,000. That's never been the case for us, but I think we've always been very modest with our budgets. We know that, especially coming into with this Kickstarter, we knew that we couldn't get $30,000 for this project. We know that wasn't a possibility. So I think gauging expectations with what you can do with a crowdfunding account based on your network and based on the project is a good idea, because we were able to achieve the modest goal that we had. And I think we're just fairly good at spending money and using those resources in the best way possible for the film.
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, as you might have all gauged, I'm not my best spokesperson. And so it's like, when we were trying to shoot like a video of me being like all excited, like, come support the film. I mean, I'm just doing a terrible job at it. I mean, I can barely speak. In order to get that sort of enthusiasm, you need to have some sort of either gimmick or some sort of person that really elicits excitement. And I'm not sure we're built for that, but we do the best we can.
So that's
Our
why you made
video
a
was
video
really
of
good,
Dara running around
Actually,
Toronto.
Dara was our best asset for that, yeah.
And a baby.
Can you
In
provide some context?
in the crowdfunding video, because you were truthfully like just kind of not super excited, we added a baby in, and that made it a lot more exciting because babies are wonderful.
A friend of ours had a baby, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But you also sang a song.
Right, yeah, I can do music, so that's my best outlet.
It's an awful process. It's terrible.
Is that something that you're going to keep doing? Like it's like
No.
something you
Really,
need to
hopefully
rely on,
not.
or is it something you don't necessarily need with how you guys have learned sort of micro budget features? I think in a very impressive way. You make really accomplished, good looking work with very little money in a way that I think very few people do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's after this is. I mean, thinking about Sophia's work too, that we've worked on. This is maybe the fourth feature that we've done on this model, and it's just not. I don't think it's sustainable. I think we're ready both in sort of creatively to kind of take a bit of a graduation in terms of budget levels, just based on the projects that we're working on. And I think we've gotten to a great level, and I think we've learned a lot making films at this size, but it's not. It's not sort of a sane way of making films. I think there's a reason why that you have a certain amount of money that you can hire an appropriate amount of crew to sort of do the job that they need to do. And I think it's always dependent upon the project, I think. If the project only requires a few people, then we can totally keep making smaller size films. But I think the scope, the ideas, the new work that we're working on demands sort of a slightly larger crew and certainly a little bit more resources to be able to pull off what we want to do artistically.
I know there's a lot of filmmakers in the audience working at these budget levels or even less. If you remove crowdfunding from the equation, could you talk about what is it that makes it possible to make films for such little money? What are the tips you might have, like very practical terms?
I think in the long run we end up doing like it's about 75% of it ourselves. It's just we've lucked into a model where there's 3 heads here, and then we find a few collaborators and are able to do a lot of it ourselves. And that's really it, is that we're directing, but Lev's also the composer. And when you don't have to pay anybody, and it becomes a lot easier when it's just 5 of you on set doing almost everything. That's sort of the only way I think that we can do it for as little money as we do. Cutting it ourselves, we're shooting it ourselves. With a few collaborators, we cut the trailers, we do the posters, Like there's just no other way of doing it for no money.
Yeah, and I mean, with our two features, we knew we wouldn't have a lot of money, so we wrote very specifically for locations that we could attain, and I think a lot of filmmakers work that way. Lev's not a producer, so he just wrote whatever he wanted to, and gave us a script, and so that was a big challenge with this film because there was lots of locations. There was a big house, or at the time, big condo that we were trying to get. So that added to sort of the pressure, but it's just about trying to write people coldly on Airbnb and say, like, hey, we have this much money, will you take it? And the worst thing they're going to say is no, like, screw off. And we found this guy with this big house, and he wanted an Airbnb review, and he gave us a deal because of that. And I think you just, people sometimes ask, oh, what was the big disaster, or what was the hardest thing? It's when you're making movies at this size, it's just all the little things. It's thinking about buying an extra bag of coffee because we drank too much of it. It's like absurd thinking about, like stressing out about buying an extra bag of groceries. But it's just those little things and figuring out how to do them in the most cost-effective way, and figuring out how to put as much money as you can on screen, because that's what's most important to us.
I think there's things like when we got to set, I think we were shooting Maya with like the needle where she's threading the clothes at the end, or the fabric, and we got there and I realized that nobody knew how to use this needle. The sewing machine. Yeah, the sewing machine. I mean, none of us knew how to do this. So like my production center ran out for like 10 minutes, looked up a manual, and was like, okay, now we can do this. And that's like the brutality of shooting, low budget features. It was like we got there and just like, holy crap, none of us know what we're doing.
I think most of us in this room are probably familiar with, it being difficult to make a living as a Canadian independent filmmaker. But I think it's also very difficult to make it as a Canadian independent film actor. And I don't know if there's anyone in the room who has already completed the Dara Campbell hat trick of VIFF 2016, but Dara is actually featured in 3 films here, not just The Intestine, but also she stars in Never Eat Alone, and she's in The Other Half. And Dara, I was wondering if you could maybe talk about your experiences as an actor working in indie productions and the difficulties and challenges of that.
You didn't prep me for a question. I guess I've been very lucky in how acting has gone for me, where like the first film I was ever cast in was called I Used to Be Darker by the director Matt Porterfield, and that was like a film that was on like the festival circuit. And from there, it's like I still have never gotten a part from an audition. It's really been from one project to another. I have started auditioning, and I'm really bad at it. And so it's been nice. I was working largely in the States and a tiny bit in Europe, and I'm from Toronto, and I moved back to Toronto, and it feels like the right place to be because. I mean, there's the strategic element of like American productions go there, and it's a smaller pond, and I'm not a particularly competitive person, so I don't think I would thrive in a more competitive place. But then, I don't know, it's been fun to navigate. Yeah, I'll need to figure out how to make a living at some point as well. But I'm thinking of going grape picking for a week, just like next week. It's like $12 an hour.
Any more questions from the audience? Yes.
I have a comment. I just thought the style was super unique, and I really appreciated it. I love the narrative. I did love the score, and I love the casting. And so I just wanted to say that for the it's a great achievement, and I just thought
Thank you.
it was beautiful.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, unless we have another question, that might be a beautiful note to go out on, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you so much.
Huh?